So what about those cinematic universes? DC is once again rebooting their whole cinematic universe, starting with Superman. Their first attempt was Green Lantern in the post-Dark Knight trilogy world, and it clearly did not make the numbers Warner Brothers wanted to make. So they might as well start again, except this time with Superman. Let's be honest, the one with Christopher Reeves, the first two at least, were Superman the movie and Superman 2, those were great. Their follow-ups, not so much. Being the first movie of a cinematic universe will always be an uphill battle. Overplan and introduce too many concepts, then you get something like Dark Universe, a mess of a film and a cinematic universe that never was. Underplan, and you'll end up getting Marvel post-Endgame. The first movie sets up a lot: aesthetics, tone, cinematography, and expectations for future movies. It's like a trilogy, except the trilogies don't have the same characters or plots, they're just going off in different directions, but you still have to maintain a consistent feel of those movies. I'm going to say this right off the bat, I don't like Man of Steel. Zack Snyder is good at visuals, with an asterisk. We'll end up talking about some of his problems, and he's good at casting. Whether he uses that cast to its full potential is a different story altogether. But I have yet to be impressed by any of his actual storytelling in any of these movies. And it's not just these movies, I didn't like Rebel Moon either, and I didn't like his whatever Spartan thing, 300 was it called? I don't even like his Watchmen crap. Did he make Watchmen? Yeah, he did. It's the 2007 Watchmen he made. So let's dig into Man of Steel and see what on earth I'm going to be complaining about, nitpicking to high hell, and just generally being annoyed at or snarking. We open with the birth of Kal-El. Why start out with Superman's birth? Well, you need to throw the Jesus symbolism in here quick, and you have to drop the hammer hard. I mean, it's just like the Holy Nativity, except it really is not. Also, call this a visual nitpick, but why is this place so dark? Shouldn't there be some kind of contrast between the darkness of Krypton, whose decadence will destroy them, and the last son of Krypton being born? After this Lion King shot, which I find weird, we see the rest of Krypton. Generally, I'm not a fan of the aesthetics of Krypton, mainly because most of it is in shadow. You could say this is a storytelling direction, where they're saying, oh, the darkness is foreshadowing its shadowy fate of absolute destruction and death. I say, if you're going to contrast this with Earth, you might as well try to make the environment feel, well, more than this. We'll get into this later. So Jor-El is arguing with the Council of Obstructive Bureaucracy that harvesting the core is a bad thing and Krypton is doomed. Jor-El wants to look to the stars, which Krypton can do, but then Krypton's ruling council is deposed by General Zod. Jor-El isn't pleased with the coup, so he's arrested. However, this is a Superman movie, and this is Jor-El. He eventually breaks free. The last days of Krypton are spent fighting over who's in charge rather than making any effort to solve the issue. Though I do love Jor-El's mount of choice as a wyvern. Again, there are some weird things with these distance shots when it comes to getting the whole vibes of Krypton. I am also amused that the genetic codex is in a building full of water. I can't help but be reminded by the whole Minecraft water elevators. Anyways, Jor-El finds the codex, which is a skull with some magical sand around it. And in this supposedly high-tech society, a skull is the major codex, and it's unguarded? I think Holocron's completely screwed up what my definition of future tech storage is. So anyways, you get the drill. Zod's coup fails, Jor-El manages to sneak the codex in with his son, and Superman is sent into the stars towards Earth. I do generally like the idea of Kryptonian technology being rounder and more organic looking than Earth's technology, but I feel like the color could have been used better. It's all black, gray, bronze, and gold. The use of light in this section of Krypton leaves much to be desired because it all looks like it's completely shadowed. Light can do all sorts of great things when it comes to setting the environment. If you ever have the chance to visit La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, this feels otherworldly and breathtaking. The pictures legitimately don't do it justice at all. The use of natural light is masterful. You feel like you're stepping into a completely different world, like you're stepping into heaven itself. You'd think spending 20 minutes amid the yellow, the steel colors, and the black would make us care about it, but no, it really does not matter. Visually, it's unappealing, which, given the formations of the buildings, it shouldn't be visually unappealing. This should be brilliant and alien and otherworldly, except it's not. It just feels dull and inept. So Krypton is destroyed, baby Clark gets the Codex, and is sent to Earth. And for the first 20 minutes of this film, I have to wonder, why does everyone's performance feel subdued? Politicians being subdued, I can understand, because politicians, Jor-El and Lara, what is wrong with them? They should not be subdued. These are a pair of parents who sent their only child into space and have the vague hopes that the child will survive on a random planet that they have never been to. They shouldn't be subdued. There should be a lot more crocodile tears than whatever this is. I know I'm showing a still of the birthing scene, but still, in general, the whole thing feels just muted. By extension, Zod feels subdued. He just lacks the menace and ham that Terrence Stamp has, and I don't blame the actor for this. Even his "I will find him" outburst feels just more out of place. It's not menacing shouting. It feels like, I know this takes place 3 years later, but Oscar Isaac's whole apocalypse bid in X-Men Apocalypse. Also, you'd really expect Kryptonian government officials to not ship him off into space in these, shall I say, very demonetizable looking pods. I know I'm rambling out of order, but who cares? So, criminals get launched off into space, and the Kryptonians just simply stay there and accept their fate. Jeez, this isn't going to be an issue. We cut to the present where Clark Kent is on a boat. And then he's on an oil rig. See, there's been a distress call. The oil rig is about to blow because of internal failures, and then this is where we break movie linearity. So Clark rescues a bunch of workers from an oil rig and the Coast Guard chopper. Then he ends up falling into the ocean, and we get a flashback. See, Clark rescuing people, that isn't weird. I totally buy that he would do that. You know what I don't like? How this is edited, mainly because I question why they break the linearity. Because it's not an artistic direction they seem to go with. It's just Clark wandering, and then he gets hurt, and then he gets a flashback. Okay, so, how would I make this non-linear make sense in the context of a Superman movie? Simple. Have Lois Lane go around asking people about Superman. That way you can change the palette of the movie, change the coloring, change the style, change a lot of things while still keeping the vision they want to keep. Because it makes sense. People have different perspectives, and they are often tinted by nostalgia, so you can have the cheerier Smallville days contrast with the oil rigs. So, as a child, Clark's powers manifested all at once, and I love this concept that he sees this as a curse, mainly because, well, we know a lot more about sensory issues than we did in the 80s, so why not take advantage of that? It's a good idea to see that as a child he would struggle with all these. What I can't get behind is the dialogue. When his teacher can't coax him out of a closet, Martha is called in to help coax her son out of the closet by his teacher. And he gives very overwritten dialogue. There are so many problems with this scene, with this one line called, "The world's too big." That is Clark's actual response to his mom trying to coax him out. Is it natural for a child to say something like this? Not really. Does natural mean good? Not always. However, when he says the world's too big, it really takes me out of the moment. There's Martha's dialogue, where she is trying to coax him out, And sounds like she's being a legitimately supportive mother, telling him, just focus on my voice in order to help him get past the sensory issues of him hearing everything in the city, possibly the world. That's honestly pretty strong and powerful stuff from Martha's end. And then there's Clark, who just reads overwritten dialogue. Nothing against the child actor, he didn't deliver it well, but at the same time, how do you deliver something like this well? It feels like they were written by two different authors, and they tried to combine their work together. Clark gets one part of the lines, and Martha gets the other, and it doesn't work together, which is not something you want when it comes to a scene like this. So, after waking up, Clark eventually gets to this street in Canada. Yes, this takes place in Canada. And Clark spots a bus, which leads us to another flashback. His school bus, when he was a teenager, ends up careening off the edge of a bridge. Why? Because the tire exploded. So, the bus is submerged underwater, and for a bus submerged underwater, even partially, this scene feels very subdued. So, you would expect panicked children to be, well, panicking, because even teenagers will go crazy when they believe their lives are on the line. Just go into any lockdown drill. Clark, rushing to the back of the bus to open the emergency exit, by extension, feels a lot less special when everything is subdued. This is a heroic moment. By extension, it makes Clark pushing the bus to safety with super strength feel less special, because if everyone is subdued, then why should the audience have much fanfare as well? Because if the characters don't care, the characters aren't the ones in actual danger, why should we? It's the same reason why bad acting always takes us out of the moment, because if a character doesn't care, or shows off a completely different emotion than what is intended, how are we supposed to react to that? We're not going to react to what the author intended. Also, another issue, this movie has been gray and washed out, so it's time to talk about color. I don't feel like this scene was intentional. Clark using his super strength on a yellow bus amid the green trees, I don't feel like it's an intentional shift from the dull grays that we've been seeing to the more colorful outdoors world. I think that's just incidental on where they filmed and what they filmed. I don't mind the idea of a gray world going to a much more colorful one when superheroes are introduced, or superpowers are introduced, something just out of the ordinary. Even though I do take issue with the trope that is real is brown and real is gray. It just feels like the whole movie wants to be gray so badly that it doesn't care if it diminishes what makes every one of these moments special. So after a conversation with Pete Ross's parents, which Martha and Jonathan try to deny what Clark did, we get the most infamous scene out of this movie. At least one of the top 3 most infamous scenes. Jonathan mulling over whether Clark should have let those kids die. Clark is a good person at heart, and Jonathan wants to keep him, quote, safe, quote. And Jonathan just wanted to let those kids die. This scene is terrible. A tie-in comic to the Superman and Lois Lane live-action show on the CW had this to say about it. When a bus is about to hit the kid, Clark speeds over and pushes the kid out of the way. And Jonathan Kent's reaction was, "What were you supposed to do, Clark? Just let him get hit?" Jonathan Kent, you are not going to win the Father of the Year award anytime soon. I get the idea of making Jonathan a flawed father who wants to do right by his son and protect him, but the justification he gives Clark and therefore the audience is just awful. The whole, oh, if only they knew what you were, you're not ready, you're going to completely redefine what it means to be a human to the whole world. So, redefine what it means to be human to the whole world. letting children die. And he chooses letting children die. The whole thing on the bus is stupid, mainly because if Clark had let everyone drown, putting aside the suspicions it would cast on Clark for surviving that, but we'll get to that never, I'm not going to talk about it because it didn't happen, the whole letting those children die would have affected Clark, because survivor's guilt is a thing, and putting a child through survivor's guilt isn't what you want to do. That would have eaten away at Clark's soul, especially since, unlike most people with survivor's guilt who couldn't save everyone, Clark very well could have. So, Jonathan Kent wants to traumatize his son. That's not Jonathan Kent. This is a monster in human flesh. It gets dumber, actually. Jonathan says Pete Ross's mom, she reacted to him with fear. We saw the scene. Don't lie to Clark, idiot. We saw it. The only time I find the words act of God inspiring fear in anyone is when it comes to insurance. Or is Jonathan Kent hallucinating the events that are happening before us? Cut back to the present. Clark is working in a bar, truck impalement. Basically, Lois Lane decides to jump into the picture because 20,000-year-old spaceship has been discovered in the ice. Fortress of Solitude, more like Fortress of Solitary Confinement. Superman cauterizes Lois's wound from one of the security drones. Ship emerges from the ice. Perry White ain't publishing this, so Lois leaks it to a conspiracy blogger. I feel like in the 2020s, if this were to happen, everyone would label Lois Lane as a designated hero, especially in light of the whole Alex Jones getting a fine the size of the GDP of entire nations for what he did to the Sandy Hook families. In hindsight, giving stuff to conspiracy theorists only can just mean, oh, that conspiracy theorist is going to have this family harassed to high hell and back. So, apparently, Jor-El uploaded his brain into the ship. Why didn't he upload his wife's brain? Because she's not played by Russell Crowe. We get our exposition dump on the Fortress of Solitary Confinement. Basically, we're told what we already know. Krypton mined its core, and it ended up destabilizing it, blasting it into oblivion. Krypton is also a stratified caste system. Basically, everyone's destiny is determined from birth. And then there's a very odd piece of dialogue where Jor-El goes on about he and Lara were very much a product of the Kryptonian decadence. And that decadence is the reason why they couldn't join Clark. Clark would have unlimited potential and they would be stymieing him. To which I say, you do realize you two broke your own programming, right? It was taboo to have an actual child and not just create them in a vat of soup in a birthing pod. So, you guys broke that policy. It means that you can change and you can give him the life that, well, you were denied. Why is it that so many shows with parents who lived under abusive parents themselves and wanted to do better managed to understand this concept better than Jor-El? No wonder Krypton blew up and him with it. He's too stupid. This is why I like the idea that that spaceship that Clark came in, that actually should have been a last-ditch result, or not made to carry live cargo like him, or quite possibly being only for the Codex, but Jor-El just simply stowawayed Clark on it. That makes a lot more sense because it feels desperate enough that he would take this gamble. Also, Krypton really builds things to last. That spaceship is like 20,000 years old. So anyways, Clark gets the Superman, and now it's time for the first flight. You're not doing a good job with the silhouettes. Seriously, I know how light works, but this is the shot they went with to frame it as Superman? He's on white snow, and why does he appear like he's in all black? The blues and the reds should contrast the snow. This is the first time I actually bought that Henry Cavill was Superman and not just super hobo guy. This feels like Superman, and if Cavill had more opportunities to play him like this, I feel like he would have been an amazing Superman on par with Christopher Reeves. Meanwhile, Lois is showing off her investigative journalism skills and figures out Clark is Superman by investigating and interviewing people and places. Seriously, movie. Why wasn't this movie about Lois Lane figuring out Clark is Superman? So let's skip over to Jonathan Kent's death. It's stupid. There is a small argument between Clark and Jonathan, and Clark says something to the effect of, "You're not my real parents," and Jonathan agrees. However, you could have just... Okay, let me get this straight. If Clark had just said that, and Jonathan and Martha were hurt, and then Jonathan died shortly after, that has a lot of tragic energy. However, Jonathan really should not have validated Clark's "you're right, we're not your parents." You know what he should have said? Something to the effect of, "We aren't your parents, but you are still our son." That feels so much stronger and so much more tragic over what happens next. Granted, the tragedy of what happens next is diminished because Jonathan is an idiot. So there's a tornado. Jonathan is injured and can't rush underneath the overpass. By the way, as someone who's lived in tornado zones, don't go under overpasses. You're better luck finding yourself in a ditch rather than an overpass. It's so stupid that Jonathan will just raise his hand and just let the tornado kill him. It's stupid because Jonathan can't believe Clark can't rescue him without his powers. It's stupid because he thinks traumatizing his own son would be better than anything else. It's stupid because this isn't a flawed father. This is someone so stupid that he cannot be sympathetic at all. And you know what? This is beyond pointless. This movie opened with Clark doing a lot of good on the oil rig. So Jonathan Kent's sacrifice, if you can even call it that, was all for nothing. It was pointless. Stupid. So anyways, it's time for the Kryptonian villains. They communicate with Earth saying, "Hey, you're harboring one of our citizens. Hand him over or we'll blast you to smithereens." Then we get the crappy life lesson again in a crappy church scene that only exists to validate the whole Clark is Jesus crap. And Superman appears in the desert to turn himself into the US military. Really crappy shot later, Superman is ready to be surrendered by Zod. The handover happens with Lois going for some reason. No, seriously, Feora asked her to come. Then we meet Zod in the holodeck, who explains that Earth is doomed because of his ambition. Clark isn't exactly in a position to fight him because, well, Kryptonian atmosphere helps take away his powers and he has a very difficult time adjusting. This is where the kryptonite is going to come into play in the next movie, but we're not there yet. Now it's time for hologram Jor-El after Lois interfaces with Kryptonian technology and that strange Kryptonian thumb drive. So Clark escapes because Jor-El's intervention. Now it's time for the final act. The Kryptonians get powers, not sure why they want to terraform Earth, because they know Krypton's atmosphere will take away their powers, so why not just have them just keep Earth's atmosphere, I guess? And the scenery destruction gets bad. Sure, the scenery destruction is bad, but it's actually pretty cool the first time you see it. However, subsequent times when they try to constantly one-up themselves within the same movie, it just gets boring, and then you're just thinking, okay, someone must really love their scenery gore. Zod begins with terraforming of Earth. We need to go have the US military do something with these terraforming devices. Kiss, kiss, fight General Zod, and man, does the scenery gore get really bad and pointless. Superman snaps Zod's neck. Mind you, he snaps the neck in such a manner that it would mean that Zod's heat vision would be turning towards the people he was trying to protect, which really beats the purpose. That's just short-sighted and stupid. I'm not against Superman killing a guy and never doing it again as a concept. In fact, I can support the idea that he feels like life is precious because killing horrified him. And in fact, John Kent, his son, learned something similar after accidentally heat visioning his own cat to death. The problem is how this movie handles it. See, you go to Superman killing Zod, and then we cut away to Superman destroying a spy plane on him, trying to figure out who he really is, and then visiting his dad's grave. Yes, other stuff happens, but I don't care. I don't like this movie. As a movie, I feel like this is the emo kid in the back of a classroom going, "It's dark, gritty, and deep. You don't understand my art piece because you don't have the great appreciation for amazing pieces of art." I also abhor the thesis of this movie, which implies that Clark will forever be the last son of Krypton and never a human. He's always going to be an expat living on Earth. To which I say, he grows up on Earth. He's raised by Earthling parents. He didn't know he was an alien until later in his life. He eats Earthling foods, has Earthling concerns, has Earthling ideas of love and romance. He doesn't fit the mold of Krypton at all. And Krypton, everyone has their fates decided. Meanwhile, Clark is wandering around trying to find his fate, trying to find what he is meant to be. That just doesn't work. Why exactly does he give a crap about Krypton besides the Silver Age did it? Sure, it's his heritage, but his interactions with his heritage are superficial at best. And I feel like the movie keeps trying to hammer the point home that Superman will always be the other. Which, no, it doesn't work. Because in order to make him the other, they had to demonize Jonathan Kent, his father on Earth. Whereas Jor-El is constantly played up. And with the whole actual interactions with Krypton's culture, well, the warrior caste ended up trying to kill him. There's also the excess of the Jesus imagery. I hate it, absolutely, because I feel like it doesn't work. He works more like a Moses figure, leading humanity to what we can be, as opposed to being the Jesus figure, dying for sins. I feel like the Moses imagery makes a lot more sense compared to the Jesus imagery, because rather than being truly God and truly man, or in this case, truly Kryptonian and truly human, it comes off as Superman being. So Clark is fully Kryptonian, fully alien, only appearing like a man. Okay, pick your round of Christological heresy. Docetism, Monophysitism, Eutychianism, Apollinarianism. Then there is the neck snap scene. This is shock value. There is no denying it. It's not even worth pretty much saying, oh, here's the million ways he could have handled that. Like, I don't know, flying upward. It's so stupid. The only reason this scene exists is to get points on the internet for controversy. And if that was Snyder's intention, he did. So, should Superman kill? Well, I try to treat every adaptation as something different, a reinterpretation of the character. And the idea that Superman killing a guy horrifying him, and that's why he refuses to kill ever again, that actually sounds interesting. The problem is that this doesn't lead to any arcs anywhere. This, shock value. There's no discussion of the sanctity of life. No, hell, even if the final scene was just Superman burying Zod or cremating him, giving him a warrior's funeral, I may have actually bought that this was an arc for Superman, that he is a man who believes that life is sacred, even his most depraved enemies' lives. But no, this isn't an arc, this is shock value. And this is honestly pathetic. Man of Steel is a bad movie. I can understand if you can enjoy the action because this is the first live-action piece which competently makes a fight scene between Kryptonians feel like a fight scene between Titans. However, lighting, cinematography, color balance, all terrible. The story isn't gritty or realistic, it's a 14-year-old emo teenager's definition of gritty realism. It's a story that relies less on drama between characters and moments and more on shock value, to the point that it subdues any good attempts at drama. And the acting is also very subdued in this movie, and I can't get behind that, even in dramatic moments. And I wouldn't mind the demonization of Jonathan Kent if it was a good movie, because all good adaptations, or at least reimaginings, involve some level of risk. This took a shot, and it missed badly. Those are just my thoughts. Please consider liking, subscribing, tipping the channel on Ko-fi. This is Cyril signing off.